Hello and welcome to Gurukul Lectures. Today we are going to see various features acquired by Archegoniates. One of the features which was acquired by the Archegoniates group was the process of spore dispersal. The transmigration of plants to the land habit led to specialization coupled with varied spore dispersal mechanisms. This led to their successful spread and also ensuring the genetic variation. As far as the spore dispersal mechanism is concerned, it is primarily based upon the process of osmosis. During the process of osmosis, when absorption of water happens, the cells become turgid, and when the water evaporates, the cells become flaccid. This transition of turgidity and flaccidity, the turgid cell and flaccid cell, there is a creation of elastic energy. This elastic energy is utilized in the spore dispersal mechanism. This is the energy which ensures abrupt throwing of spores from their sporangium. This mechanism, this elastic energy can be used in various ways, such as a catapult type of spore dispersal, a dispersal of air sacs. So, we will see that various different groups of plants have shown different strategies of spore dispersal. When Archegoniates ventured onto land, they experienced a lot many challenges. One of the challenge was getting acquainted with the external environment, getting acquainted with the environment which was less in water, which was very dry and harsh to the plants, which was having very intense light exposure, which was very scarce in terms of nutrient medium. So, when plants ventured onto terrestrial habit, they adapted to life on land by internalizing the external atmosphere, and they explored the soil in a much intensive manner. So, what they did develop certain features which could help them succeed in a much better way than their aquatic ecosystem. One of the features of such adaptations was formation of roots and rhizoids. When plants ventured terrestrial habitat, they started developing a structure called as rhizoids. When we see this timeline, it was somewhere around 500 million years ago when the first land plant arose. The first land plant being the mosses, we could see that there is development of rhizoids. Rhizoids are nothing but some specialized cell growing out of the lower epidermis, going down to the substratum, which is now moist soil, and these rhizoids started helping in the process of anchorage. They also help the plants in mineral absorption, but as far as water absorption is concerned, we are not very sure about it. So, for the first time, a specialized group of cells started developing, which helped them in a proper anchorage, absorption of minerals, because the outer atmosphere was much dry and the plants were no longer submerged in an aquatic environment. As plants moved from mosses towards pteridophytes or lycophytes, which is also the vascular plants, we would see that these rhizophytes have evolved into true roots. Now, true roots differ from rhizoids in having mechanical tissues, in having the capability of absorption of water from the soil, of capability of absorbing minerals from the soil and also the ability to provide proper anchorage. As land plants were evolving, their body size also was growing. So it was necessary for them to have a better hold on the substratum. Roots provided that support. From pteridophytes, when we move towards ferns, we will see that the roots got more and more specialized. These specialized were to the tune that now roots have started developing mechanical tissues, because the body size of the plant above the soil was much larger. It was the necessity of the terrestrial habit, because more the size of plant body, more will they be exposed to the light, and more they will be able to survive. So this anchorage and mechanical support was provided by proper roots. In gymnosperms, the proper roots go much deep inside the soil, and this is how we see that the gymnosperms have a height of sometimes meters and sometimes to the tune of 100 meters. So these archegoniates have started developing a feature. They started developing an organ which helped them in anchorage, mineral absorption and water absorption. The other challenge which was faced by terrestrial habitat, by these plant groups which moved from water habitat to a terrestrial land, was water scarcity. They needed to ensure that the spores, the cells which are representatives of gametophytic generation, they survive, they are more viable. And to ensure, they have started developing a mechanism of covering these spores with a desiccation resistant structure, desiccation resistant chemical, sometimes also called as sporopollenin. So this diagram represents various types of spores of mosses. Here we can see that all these mosses, they have a peculiar ornamentations. These ornamentations are nothing but a secretory substance. A secretory substance is much similar to sporopollenin in their chemical composition. Now let us understand what are the various unifying features of archegoniates, because Archegoniate as such is a conglomeration of three different large plant groups: the bryophytes, the pteridophytes and the gymnosperms. What makes them fall under one category of Archegoniate? How we can define that this particular group can be clubbed together? So there are certain features which are exhibited by all the three groups. So let us understand these unifying features of archegoniates. The first and foremost unifying feature of these archegoniates happens to be the regular and heterologous alternation of generation. As we know, alternation of generation is a very common feature, a very common phenomenon in the life cycle of archegoniates. In alternation of generation, the sporophytic generation is alternated with gametophytic generation. The gametophyte produces spores after meiosis. These spores are the first cell to represent gametophytic generation. These spores, they divide mitotically and give rise to gametophytic generation. These gametophytic generation bear male sex organ and female sex organs. Male sex organs and female sex organs produce anthrazoids and egg cells respectively, and they fertilize to give rise to zygote, and further they produce embryos. So embryo is the first stage of sporophytic generation. So in this manner, the gametophytic generation and sporophytic generation alternate with each other. This type of life cycle is found common in all different types of plant species which fall under archegoniates. The one very unique feature about this alternation of generation is their heterologous nature. A heterologous nature is also a heteromorphic nature. What is heterologous and heteromorphic? Let us understand that. When the sporophyte generation and gametophyte generation is morphologically distinct, and they also differ in their structure and physiology, such type of alternation of generation is termed as heteromorphic or heterologous alternation of generation. So, all different types of plants which are clubbed together under Archegoniates, they exhibit a regular phenomenon of life cycle and all of a regular phenomenon of alternation of generation, and all of this alternation of generation is always heterologous or heteromorphic. All of the Archegoniates are terrestrial in nature. The degree of their dependency on water has gradually reduced as they have moved from early land plants to more recent land plants. When we see certain genera in bryophytes, we will see that they prefer a land mass which contains moisture, which is near the banks of any water body, which has a shady place, whereas when we see certain genera of pteridophytes, they do not require such dependency on water. And when we see the species of gymnosperms, they are almost independent of any water body or any water source. So, we see that all these groups of plant, be it bryophytes, be it pteridophytes, or be it gymnosperms, they all venture on terrestrial habit. The degree of their dependency on water may vary. Another unifying feature of Archegoniates is the structure and ontogeny of the organs. In this cladogram, we will see that somewhere around 475 million years ago, the land plants originated. After their venturing into terrestrial habit, for the first time, stomata was developed and evolved, and then followed by the event of branching of sporophytes. Similarly, we can see that development of vasculature, development of roots, and development of seed habits happened later on during the time period. So, as we can see that as land plants gradually ventured onto the land and evolved, these various events took place where different types of plant organs have developed. And if you could see their ontogeny during the development of any plant, we will find that their ontogeny remains same across various Archegoniates. For example, if we see the ontogeny of vasculature, that is how with different types of conducting tissues are developing inside a plant body, we will find that their process of development is same amongst all plants which evolved after lycophytes. For example, the process of development of vasculature will be same in lycophytes, monilophytes, gymnosperms, and angiosperms. Similarly, the ontogeny of stomata is similar across all different plant groups, be it bryophytes, be it pteridophytes, or be it gymnosperms. When plants ventured onto land, they experienced an extreme, harsh, dry environment. Embryos were the first stage of sporophytic generation. They needed to ensure the viability of embryo to germinate into a successful sporophytic plant body. Also, their dependency on nutrient was to be ensured. To adapt to this changing environment, these gametophytes, these archegoniates have developed as a strategy in which the embryo is encapsulated inside the archegonium, and these archegonium at a later stage of development gives rise to a protective covering, and these embryo are nutritionally dependent upon the plant, the gametophytic plant. So, across all the members of Archegonity, be it bryophytes, be it pteridophytes, or be it gymnosperms, we will find that the embryo is always found within the confinements of Archegonium. One such unifying feature of Archegoniate is precautious spore germination. Now, what is precautious spore germination? A spore that could be called precautious germinators when they germinate as soon as they are formed inside the host cell or they are released from bursting cells. Now, this precautious spore germination is one added advantage which ensured that their life cycle is completed in a very short span of time. There should be no lag between the gametophytic phase and the sporophytic phase. Why? Why this lag was necessary? This lag was necessary because when the plant ventured onto land, the environmental conditions were much harsh. So, whenever they have the opportunity of a favorable condition, they needed to ensure that they produce spores very quickly, and these spores which are produced, they germinate without any delay into a successful sporophytes. This lack of any gap between production of spores and germination of spores minimized the time period of the life cycle. This also ensured that the whole life cycle is completed within a very short span of time, so that whatever short span of favorable condition is available to the gametophyte on land is utilized in completing a successful generation. A successful offspring could be produced. So, these are various unifying features which we have seen amongst the Archegoniates. Now, let us also understand what had been the reason of this transformation. What was the reason why the aquatic plants needed to move from aquatic habitat to the plant world, and how they were the most suitable organisms who could move from the aquatic habitat to the terrestrial habitat. Now, let us see a brief history of how different types of plant cells have evolved. Now, molecular systematics and study of cell structure tells us that more than 1 billion years ago, a heterophytic protist acquired an endosymbiont, and a photosynthetic descendant of such ancient protist evolved into red alga and green alga. Now, from these cells of green alga, we believe that rest of the land plants have evolved. So, let us understand a heterophytic eukaryote engulfed an autotrophic prokaryote, which is in this case cyanobacterium, and the first event of endosymbiosis take place. The primary event, the first event of endosymbiosis gave rise to red algal group and the green algal group. From this green algal group, the secondary event of endosymbiosis also took place, and then from one of the lineages came out the Charophyceae. This Charophyceae group is supposed to be the lineage, is supposed to be the ancestors of all the land plants, and thus the Archegoniates. At least 375 million years ago, the lineage that produced green alga gave rise to land plants. It is very evident from this phylogram that origin of plants took place as back as 475 million years ago from a group of green alga called as Charophyceae. And from this common ancestral, from this monophyletic group, arose bryophytes, the seedless and the seed plants, and finally the angiosperms also. The researchers have identified that green alga, which belong to Charophyceae, are the closest one, which is very evident from this diagram. Thus, Archegoniates were the first land plant which ventured from the aquatic group to from the aquatic habitat to the terrestrial habitat. There are multiple morphological and biochemical evidences also to suggest that how these algal ancestors might have been the well-suited candidate for the movement towards land plant. Thank you so much.